Gates. 1. It was twilight, and Elder Fior was travelling through thick forest, alone and on foot. It was common enough for the clergy to travel alone. Their rough-spun woolen habits and cowls identified them as clerics, granting them summa salus, or complete immunity, everywhere the conclave remained sovereign. The elder checked over his supplies, paying particular attention to the roll of parchment. Without this proclamation, his immunity would be of little use. The men of Valehaven would probably strip him of everything but the immunity, then leave him to the wolves. Elder Fior was a man who preferred to assert his better qualities rather than evidence them in any meaningful way. On occasion, he would affect a monastic, authoritative tone which went down well with the credulous. With a more sceptical audience, however, the elder would vacillate between a kind of cosy humility and straightforward, righteous indignation, depending, of course, on whether he had kept his temper. His robes, meanwhile, were a twill weave of pewter and indigo, the colours of his order. Otherwise, he travelled to Kelst. Since his time as an acolyte, Fior had been asked about going barefoot so often that he'd contrived a short sermon, which he would muzzle inquiring minds. After all, he thought, what were the clergy for? "My reasons are grave," he would announce severely, "for they are the reasons of the gods. My modest flesh endures rips and tears like the incarnate Ada and hubris of old. I embody their humility as you should embody mine. Do so, then, and keep your inane questions to yourself." Elder Fior found that being difficult to understand impressed the credulous too. He continued his journey. Another of the elder's affectations was a pronounced limp. In company he would lean heavily on his cane, a modest affair of untreated blackthorn timber. He liked the ensemble. The shoeless vestments, pious spiel, and exaggerated infirmity had the accumulated effect of painting a very specific picture, a picture of a man who could be easily underestimated. In the thick forest, however, Elder Fior was alone, so he held his cane aloft and stepped lightly between the stubborn cones littering the forest floor. Around him, the conifers rose haughtily toward the twilight sky, refusing to concern themselves with the pretensions of a journeyman preacher. Growing up, Fior had learned to love them for their indifference, and he loved them still. The cleric snatched a lungful of citrus air. It smelled like home. Fior had learned early in life that pretense could offer protection. He had endured a harsh upbringing. He and his sister were banished from the family farm just after turning 12, and his sister had died since then, a death he'd never really gotten over. No excuse had been offered to the twins when their father evicted them, and they hadn't expected one. Their short lives up to that point had been punctuated by their father's prolific violence, but also by their mother's sorry attempts to protect them. One day, Fior pretended he wouldn't miss his mother. That was his first lesson. Since then, Fior had fallen hard in love with the provincial forests of his youth. On the road, he had been forced to develop a more ruthless persona to protect himself and his sister. He had also developed an interest in all forms of weaponry. Then, as now, he had appreciated the wood's indifference to the things he had done. It was also a consequence of his early life that Fior travelled barefoot. In fact, he had never worn or even owned a pair of shoes. When he had first arrived at the monastery, he wore sandals of the order, finding the endless loops and laces incomprehensible. After all, his feet had calloused from years of exposure, and the worn stone of the monastery was a welcome relief after years of bracken and dirt. Fior was the only one of the order to go without sandals, so while they were not sacrosanct, his choice begged an explanation. Furthermore, he could never admit to his brothers and fathers that he wouldn't wear sandals because he found them too confining on his toughened, backwoods bastard feet. And hence, he developed the pious sermon. At long last, Elder Fior approached the tree line, yards from the north side of the river. The river was wide, so he would need to continue to move nimbly along the soggy bank until he reached the bridge upstream. This would give him access to the West Trail, which, like the rivers, originated in the West Mountains. Behind the mountains, a stubborn strip of cobalt blue resisted the coming storm. Elder Fior would therefore reach Violevin at full dark. He took a final breath, checked for the parchment again, and stepped out from the trees. Gates